Hi, very good morning. I'm Tarun Khurana. I'm from Khurana and Khurana IP Attorneys. And thank you very, very much for joining in. We still have about 1 minute or so. So we'll wait for a few other people to join in the meanwhile. I would request everybody to please keep their connections on mute so that there is very little background noise that's coming in. And as and when anybody has any questions, please raise their hands, or they can sort of either put me in the chat or put a hands up mark accordingly, and I will be happy to unmute them and ask, feel free to ask questions accordingly. Okay, so I think we are at 11 o'clock sharp. Very good morning once again. To give a very quick introduction, I am Tarun Khurana. I am one of the founding partners at Khurana and Khurana IP Attorneys. I head the patent department here at the firm, and we, as a firm, are a team of about 200 professionals across 10 offices in India, and do a lot of representation and active work for a lot of academic uh, institutions ranging from many IITs to Indian Institute of Science to Tata Institute of Fundamental Research to many other academic entities, either in the public space or even in the private context. So we work extensively with them, not only on intellectual property issues, but also on a variety of other legal issues where we support them on their contracts and agreements, on handling legal notices, aspects of that nature. We've been doing a lot of webinars from the last ever since the lockdown happened, and as part of our industry academia interactions and being a facilitator in the space, we thought of doing a webinar only and directed solely for the academic institutions, and therefore reached out to you. And absolutely, very, very much thank you very, very much for joining in and sparing your time. It may not be a 2-hour webinar per se. It could essentially be for an hour, hour and a half, depending on how the questions flow up. And I'm happy to take up questions. Please feel free to ask them anytime. We don't need to wait till the end of the session at all. And I'm happy to answer anything at all. I have a few slides. Very happy to take them through you so as to give you examples, and look forward to a healthy interaction. If there are any starting questions, if there's any expectation that you would like to set, the main intent of the session is not to explain what intellectual property are or is, and what are the types of intellectual properties and how they can be registered. I'm sure you would have gone through many, many training sessions on that aspect to understand what IPs are all about. So this is not an introduction session on IPs in particular, but mainly a session directed towards understanding how institutes and academia can manage their IP, can hold their portfolios, can file internationally, can and commercialize them, monetize them, and what we can learn from other academic institutions in the same space to see how they are managing it and perhaps implement good practices into our practice as well. That's the intent. So I can just wait for 20 seconds. If there's any question that anybody wants to ask right now or say anything at all, I'm happy to hear and progress forward accordingly. All right. Arindam, can you please take off your sharing, please, because I'll have to share the screen.
Yeah, I'll just ask Bhumika to stop sharing. Just a second. Yeah, we can see your screen.
So I will not do a full screen here, just so as to minimize just so that I can see the other people and the chats and other things as well. Yeah, a very good morning to everybody once again. I would request everybody to please send in questions through chats if and when they want. All right, so already given my introduction, just wanted to take a couple of minutes to talk about the different types of intellectual properties that we have from our standpoint. I'll just put off my video for a minute and focus on the presentation. Just 1 second. All right, so there are different types of intellectual properties, as we are all aware. Intellectual property is nothing but a creation of mind, which are for which you get statutory rights. So there are many intellectual properties for which there are rights given by the legislature, and there are intangible assets on the other side for which there is, for example, human capital, for which we don't get any rights to protect, and therefore, although we can. Although we have human capital, for example, it's very difficult to protect it, and it's very difficult. So you can really develop human capital, but once it moves from one entity or one company to another company, there is no way that you can protect it from happening. And hence, the main difference between intangible assets and intellectual property is that the intellectual property can be protected through a legal statute and can be monitored and can be enforced and commercialized as a matter of right. Like you have the property in general, where you have an ownership of that property, you can sell it, you can lease it. Likewise, you have rights for the intellectual property side of it as well. There are mainly 4 types of intellectual property. There are others as well. I'll focus only on the 4. There are patents, which are given for technical improvements or scientific improvements that an inventor does. There are trademarks, where trademarks are filed essentially for protecting the brands of a particular company. It could be a mark, it could be a logo, it could be any other graphical representation that can associate the products or services of that entity with the brand owner or the person behind that particular mark. So, for example, Daimler, the Mercedes-Benz, Tata Motors, all of them have their own logos and their graphical representations, looking at which you can say that, yeah, this is a Tata car versus this is a Mercedes versus this is a BMW. Copyrights, on the other hand, focus more on expressions being protected. They focus more on whatever literary work that we have done. So the books that we write, the lyrics that somebody writes for the songs, they're all protected through expressions, through tangible expressions on a piece of paper. And all of those expressions get protected by virtue of copyrights. And designs, as being the 4th intellectual property, mainly focuses on the shapes and the aesthetics of the article being protected. So if you wish to protect, for example, the shape of a bottle or the shape of your mobile phone or shape of a particular, any article or a book or any other article that you essentially have, only the shape aspect of it, you can protect it through a design registration. But the most important intellectual property, or the most relevant intellectual property for most academic entities are the patents. And they're the ones that their faculty, their R&D departments, and their professors would essentially focus on as regards developments is concerned. And therefore, most of the focus while developing an IP portfolio, while devising IP policies, while structuring the IP cells, as you would see in various institutes and universities and colleges, is oriented towards patents, because that is what is substituting the paper publication that was earlier the main prominent activity and is now being replaced with patents. Now, the basic principles of most intellectual properties, I mean, obviously they vary across the 4 that I have mentioned here, but then the basic principles remain same. The basic principles focus on the fact that most of the intellectual properties except copyrights are territorial in nature, which means that they are only protecting you in the country of your preference. So for example, if you have a patent application, you filed it in India, it will only be protected in India and not in any other country? One second. Not be protected in any other country, and therefore is territorial. So if you have filed a patent application for an invention that you have done and you have protected it only in India, then somebody in the US can go ahead and copy the same invention and commercialize it, and you will not be able to stop him from doing so, because you've not filed and protected your rights in that particular country. Therefore, it's very important for you to be able to file your patent applications within a time-defined period in all the countries wherever you wish to have your protection. That's very important. So it's not that merely filing in India serves the intended purpose. Second, patents are valid for 20 years from filing, which means that once you have filed a patent application, once the patent gets granted, it has a life of 20 years from the date of filing, not from the date of grant. Third, any prior publication would destroy the novelty. So a lot of academic entities that we work with, which are new to patent filing in particular, for example, we work with the Manipal Group, and we work with KIIT, we work with West Bengal University. So about 100 different academic institutes. But the entities which are strong, and the entities which are, for example, new in terms of patent filing, would not all of the inventors understand that prior publication would destroy the novelty of your invention, which means that once an inventor or a professor of a college goes and publishes his paper, and after 5 days, for example, wants to file a patent application and the paper is already published by that time, you will never be able to get the patent granted in totality. So as on the date of filing of a patent application, there should be nothing in the public domain that talks exactly about the same subject matter as your invention. And therefore, if you yourself have published a paper, even though it is your own publication, you will never be able to get a patent unless, for example, there's nothing in the public domain that exactly talks about it. But your own paper would absolutely destroy the novelty of your invention. There are a few questions coming in. All patents are granted for 20 years. Yes, I've already mentioned that all patents are granted for 20 years from the date of filing. Patents, coming back to the presentation again, the fourth point, patents are first to file, which means that anybody who files a patent application first gets the patent. So it does not really depend on at what level of research are you in. So if a Professor A is doing a research on a subject matter and a Professor B in another college is doing a research on the same subject matter, even if A has done more research and has more data, if Professor B files the patent application before the filing of Professor A, he is the one who would get the patent, even if his research is not as matured as the research of Professor A. So it's very important to understand that anybody who files a patent application first gets the patent application granted to him, and not the one who has more data or who has done more advanced research. Now, a provisional versus complete, I think is also very important to understand. There are two types of patent applications. One is a provisional application. The other is a complete application, wherein provisional application would essentially mean that your application is not full. You file it as a preliminary application because you don't have all the data. You are still doing your research is in progress. And if you believe that in the next 12 months of your research, you will be able to get more data, more substantive improvements can be done to your technology, you can protect your idea very quickly by filing a provisional application, and you don't have to wait till the filing of the complete. Because once you file the complete application, you cannot add any new matter to your application. So if you've added elements A, B, and C in your complete application, and you have filed the claims based on A, B, and C, and tomorrow, 3 months down the lane, you identify that addition of element number D can also further improve the performance of your invention, then you will have to file a separate application, but the earlier application you cannot add element number D. But if you filed a provisional application with A, B, and C, you get 12 months to file the complete application, and at any point in time that you make improvements by adding elements number D or E or F, you can continue to file more provisionals, and all these provisionals can be combined within a period of 12 months from the first provisional to make a complete application. And that is how you essentially protect your rights by filing a provisional application very quickly, even though your invention was not fully matured up. I'll take a question. There is a question, QCOM BTD. Could you please share your question, sir? Yeah, so maybe Kokilak, could you share your question? Could you ask your question? Hello.
Sir, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, sir.
Dr. Mukesh Gupta speaking from Suraj Gandhar University.
All right, sir.
Sir, you have mentioned in the basic principle that patents valid for 20 years from filing.
20 years from the date of filing, that's correct, sir.
Right, sir. So this is a continuous process, or we have to renew it after 10 years?
So you have to renew it after the grant of the patent. So for example, if you file a patent application today and your patent application gets granted after 3 years, for example, then every year after the grant of the patent, you will have to renew it till the time you wish to maintain the patent. So it's called the annuity fees. You may maintain it for 4th year and 5th year, and then you may decide that to not continue with the application at all, or you can maintain it for all the 20 years. It is your convenience.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Any other question?
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Myself, Dr. R.C. Chipa. Hello.
Yes, Dr. Chipa. Yes, sir.
ऐसा था कि हमने यूनिवर्सिटी पहले इस इंडस्ट्री में हमने डिजाइन पेटेंट्स फाइल किए थे करीब 25 इयर्स अगो। तो उसमें जो डिजाइन पेटेंट्स हमने फाइल किए थे तो वो बनाए तो मैंने थे और जो कंपनी थी उसके नाम से मैंने फाइल किए थे।
ओके।
तो अब उसका कुछ हो सकता है क्या ऐसा?
सर डिजाइन की जो लाइफ होती है वो वैसे भी 10 इयर्स की होती है और आप उसको 5 साल से ज्यादा एक्सटेंड नहीं करवा सकते हैं। तो टोटल लाइफ आपकी डिजाइन की वैसे भी 15 साल से ज्यादा की हो नहीं सकती है। ये जो 20 साल
जैसे जो मेरा जो पोर्टफोलियो है उसमें मैं क्या लिख सकता हूँ क्या ऐसी चीजें?
हाँ, तो आप अपनी एक ईमेल कर सकते हैं हमें पूरा पोर्टफोलियो के साथ में, जो भी आपके पास नंबर्स हैं आप हमें ईमेल कर सकते हैं और हम आपको रिवर्ट बैक करके उनका स्टेटस बता सकते हैं।
नहीं, एक्चुअल में क्या था कि उस समय मैंने 45 डिजाइन पेटेंट्स फाइल किए थे।
सर डिजाइन पेटेंट्स कुछ होते नहीं हैं, या तो आपने डिजाइन फाइल किए होंगे या फिर आपने फाइल किए होंगे।
और भी मैं बता रहा हूँ सर, और उसी के साथ में 7 हमने प्रोसेस पेटेंट फाइल किए थे।
So Mr. Chipra, I think it's a specific issue क्योंकि वो फिर आपके पर्टिकुलर केस से रिलेटेड है। तो मैं आपको रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि आफ्टर द कॉल आप या तो मुझे फोन कर लीजिएगा या फिर एक ईमेल कर दीजिएगा एंड वी कैन टॉक अबाउट योर केस।
हेलो।
ओके सर।
हेलो।
Yes, Hina ji बताइए। Yes, Hina ma'am, please tell.
Yes. I am from LPU Associate Professor Dr. Hina Upadhyay. Sir, I have one query regarding the same. Please tell us about the idea patent we have to submit, or so please tell me about the idea patent.
Ma'am, there is nothing called the idea patent. A few people call it idea patent, few people call it innovation patent, few people call it design patent, few people call it innovation utility patent. So please let's not get confused. There is only one patent, which is the patent that I have talked about here, which is given and granted solely and only for technical improvements that you do to an invention or to a subject matter. So any scientific improvement, any technical improvement that you do. So for example, if you've improved the security of a data network, or if you have, for example, created a carburetor which has a particular type of better efficiency by means of a structure, all of those are technical scientific improvements and you get patents only for that. So there is no other idea patent or innovation patent or anything of that nature.
Okay, sir. I have another query regarding the same. Suppose for the one crop, I have made some compound for such a type of, space management. So I have published a one paper for the same. And now for the another compound, that is a different group of crop. Clear? So suppose one belongs from the cereal, another belongs from the legumes crop. So I have made another one compound. So I have one query. The basic concept I have already published. For the another crop, I have modified that particular compound. May I apply for the patent?
Ma'am, it would depend on the modification that you have done. That if the modification is substantive in nature, if it is if it is strong enough to survive or stand alone, and if the examiner would not feel that your invention is obvious in view of your paper publication that you have done, then you can surely file for a patent application. But if the improvement that you have done is insignificant or is not strong or substantive enough, then the examiner is likely to refuse your patent solely based on the fact that the improvement is insignificant compared to your own paper publication that you have done earlier.
Okay. So the university, for suppose we are working in an LPU, the university is trying to apply for our one patent filing, and another one is for the individual we have to file patent. What is the difference between the two? Please tell me.
And the difference is in terms of the ownership. That if the university files for it, then in all likelihood they would be the applicant in a patent application. And maybe if you allow me the next 35-40 minutes, I will be talking about ownership issues. So maybe you will get clarity on that front from that perspective.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, myself, Dr. A. Shekhawat from SGEVU, Jaipur.
Yes, sir.
Sir, hello.
Gigi, please tell me.
Sir, suppose I have released a variety, especially with regards to wheat. What will be the status of that variety with regards to patent?
So you will have to most likely register it. We will have to see how significantly improved or if there is what kind of genetic modification you have done in that variety. But it will most likely go as a plant variety protection, not in the form of a patent.
According to CDAC, we have registered the variety in the varietal registration committee.
So that is the protection that you will get, because varieties are not protected as part of patents, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Any other question, please, Mukesh?
Sir, could I ask you one more question?
Please, Mukesh.
सर जैसे जो कॉपीराइट का होता है, तो हम जो पेपर पब्लिश करते हैं उस पर भी कॉपीराइट मांगा जाता है और एक कॉपीराइट के लिए हम फाइल करते हैं, राइट? तो which one is better?
So copyright is an implicit right. As I said, the main intent of this session wasn't to explain about intellectual properties, but just for clarity, copyrights are implicit right, which means that आपको फाइल करने की जरूरत होती नहीं है copyright की. Once you have created the work, once you have put it in the form of an expression, it is automatically protected in your capacity, and therefore you would file it only so that tomorrow when somebody else copies it, you can prove that you had created this work on a particular date. Otherwise, a registration of a copyright is not necessary. It is unlike patents and trademarks and designs, you don't need to go to the registry and protect it. It is an implicit registration, automatic registration that happens, but you would file it only because tomorrow if somebody wants you to prove that when did you create it, if you have a registration certificate, then you can prove it with very much ease.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Sir, one more question, sir. I am Dr. Bright Keswani. Sir, I had submitted 4 patents through some consultant in 2018, and he said that he had filed applications, but now he is silent. Till now he is silent. Now,
Dr. Keswani, I think these are specific issues. I think we should discuss them offline and not as part of the whole group. But you can always send me an email, and I rest assured I will email back to you with the status and wherever it stands as regards the communication is concerned, because your agent or attorney might have sent you some filing receipt which might have got some application numbers, and we can check up based on that. But if he has not sent you anything, then you might contemplate taking some legal action or asking him to give declaration that he has not filed it or filed it. So we can talk about it offline separately, sir.
Okay, I will send you all the details through email.
All right, Dr. Keswani.
Please help.
All right.
Good morning, sir. This is Dr. Anurag Mishra. I have one query. That is in any sector the term of patent may be increased from 20 years in any sector?
Sir, not in India, but in the US, there is a concept of patent term extension. And in certain other countries like Europe also, there is supplementary protection that you get. But in India, you will the timeline cannot go beyond 20 years in any case, even if it's pharmaceutical or if it is a software related invention or if it's a mechanical invention. It's a very standard specific 20-year timeline, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Any other question or can we move on?
Hello?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, Dr. Sasikala?
Yes. I am from Jawaharlal Nehru Technological University, Hyderabad.
Yes,
last year, 3 patents were granted, Indian patents were granted. And now there are a couple of industries who are interested in commercializing it. So I have no clue as to how we can charge them for that. So
there is a process of valuation of patent, or you can also do an industry level analysis of similar technologies in your domain of how much license fee did it command, what kind of. So I will have to understand whether it's an exclusive license or whether you're selling the patent or what kind of relationship you are in. But the value could really range from 10 lakh rupees to 1 crore, 10 crore, 15 crores, depending again on the valuation of the technology in context. So if you would either have to get a proper formal valuation done, or you can do a comparable study, which means that you might want to do a research on similar technologies which have been licensed by other academic entities and understand how much royalty did they get, what was the upfront, did they get 5 lakhs or 15 lakhs or 20 lakhs, and how much was the royalty, which usually is around 2 to 5% of the net sales.
Okay. And about this valuation, when I inquired with some organization like yours, they are asking for 2 lakhs per patent valuation. So,
and the cost of valuation, so ma'am, that depends on the consulting firm. For example, we also charge about 70 to 80,000 rupees to do a valuation exercise, because it takes a lot of time and energy to obtain the market data, because valuations is all about projections of financial numbers, and unless those projections are accurate, your valuation would never be reliable. And therefore we have to research and do a market study to see how much is the market potential, how much market capture would the licensee or the person doing the commercialization would be able to achieve. And there are many more parameters that need to be looked upon. I can send you a sample valuation report if you wish, but any strong valuation consultant would charge you around 70,000 rupees and onwards.
Okay, for academic institutes, I think this would be quite
which is the reason why, Dr. Sasikala, I was saying that if you don't want to invest money in that exercise, you might want to do a comparable study where you can look at similar technologies and you can email the professors there and talk to them on the phone. I'm sure other professional colleagues in your domain would be happy to discuss their success stories with you and share a value on how much you can expect as regards royalty is concerned or license fee is concerned.
Okay, thanks a lot for the clarification. Thank you.
Any other question before we move on?
That's
all right. So I was on the. Yes, sir. Dr. Shippa.
Yes. Is there any possibility for universal patent?
No, sir. There is nothing of that nature at all. Patents are territorial, as I have written it here also. So you will have to protect it on a country by country basis, sir.
So the monetary will be more and more when we file territory-wise.
That's correct, sir. So let me continue. Yeah, Dr. Chippa, I have a few points which maybe at the end of the presentation we can have these questions, because there'll be many questions which might get answered during the presentation itself.
Okay, sir.
All right. So the last point that I wanted to talk about in the presentation was that we have to focus on the claims. It's very important that claims are the most important section of any patent application. And I will mention it now a number of times in the presentation going forward as well, that a lot of academic professionals that come to us are very concerned on the money part of it in terms of maybe the budget that they have, the cost that they have, and therefore they are willing to sacrifice on the quality of a patent application to whatever level that it takes, which I think is the worst thing that anyone can do, because the inventions that they do are after a lot of extensive research. And if you don't protect them appropriately, if your claims are not appropriately worded, if they don't give you the desired protection, if the protection that they give you is very narrow, then there's absolutely no point to have a patent in the first place itself. So it's extremely important to ensure that you file maybe lesser number of patents, but the quality of such patents and the claims in particular is absolutely appropriate and gives you the desired level of broadness as regards protection is concerned. Now, coming to IP portfolio management, which was the main topic of today, there are certain points that I've mentioned as good practices that we have learned from many other academic institutions that we counsel and consult on a regular basis. Now, the first one is it is extremely critical to develop a portfolio. I think all of us need to understand that gone are the days when we would boast of papers being published in various journals and that was enough. We've already seen a lot of private institutions, Amity, for example, Chitkara, for example, many other SRM, many other academic institutions take a lot of pride in the patent portfolio that they've developed, and that sort of helps them position as a research-oriented institute, or as a research-oriented academic entity, and which gives them a differentiator to from amongst many other institutes. Most of the IITs, as we see, are very heavy onto patent filings, and Institute of Science, for example, and therefore I think it is very imperative that the institutes and colleges and universities that are not active in filing patents at this point in time will, from a long-term standpoint, lose the race quite significantly in view of the fact that R&D will perhaps become the most critical differentiator between the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 academic institutions, and therefore extremely important to focus on research and development. And one metric of demonstrating the output of the R&D is through patents. And therefore, I've mentioned in the subpoint that patents have now become greater than papers. You have obviously been seeing a lot of recommendations and notifications and guidelines coming in from the Ministry of Education as well, where they emphasize on certain number of patents to be filed, certain types of patents to be filed, promoting more education on IPR. And therefore, I think I wanted to emphasize on this point that time has come that unless we want to really lag behind, R&D becomes a very critical part of our focus areas. In fact, most of the big institutes that we counsel at this point in time have a dean of research. They have an R&D center. They have certain very dedicated faculty that only does research. And therefore, I think future is strong for sure for such entities that have realized the importance of R&D. I have also mentioned that it's very critical for us to have a very robust IPR policy. And I've given many links. I will share this presentation to everybody as well. And these are some exemplary lists indicating various policies that Indian and foreign institutes have created. So, for example, I have, this is the policy of Harvard, for example. This is the IPR policy of Washington University. And maybe we can go through a couple of them. This is, for example, the University of Washington. It's a very exhaustive IPR policy where they talk about what patents and invention policy is all about, what is the purpose of the policy, who are the employees of the university, what kind of transfers can take place from one entity to another, or how will the transfer or ownership be defined for each of the inventions. Then they talk about what types of inventions are being handled or related to the university, and what will university take care of directly and or indirectly, which ones would be funded by the university. All of these points, their administrative policies, their employment policies will obviously be factoring into their IP policy, because that is how the benefit sharing will take place. They have a copyright policy on the copyrights on the papers being published, on the articles being written, on many other literature or subject matter being created. I'm just going through a very high-level sample IPR policy, and you can even see Indian policies from IIT Bombay, from Anna University, IISc Bangalore, TIFR, TIFAC, many other institutes. Most of them have robust IPR policy, which they sort of take a lot of pride in to follow, and it is very exhaustive. They talk about the type of materials which will be creating or storing such intellectual property, how will the rights be established for internal use, and the rights will vary depending on whether the research was industry sponsored, university sponsored, whether it being done pro bono by the professor, how will the royalties be divided between the inventors. I'm just going through the broad level. Liability of the university, liability of the inventor in case of an issue on freedom to operate, administrative policies on how IPR committee will be formed, who will be a part of that committee, who will be from the research side, who will come in from the legal side, and how will the technology transfer office work, which is called the TTO. So all of these are very important, and this link will be shared with you as well. So these are various clauses that become part of a comprehensive IPR policy. And I think once you have decided that R&D and IP is going to be an important activity of your forte, then I think the next step has to be to develop and put forth to everybody in charge a robust IP policy. It should not be a high-level 2-3 page policy. It has to be robust. It has to talk about the committees. It has to talk about your commercialization strategy. It has to talk about how will the patents be developed, who will file, how much will be filed, what is the approval process, what is the disclosure process, how will the attorneys be defined, everything. So can you please mute your mic, whosoever background noise is coming? And if there's any question till here? So I'm moving forward. Once you have the IP policy, then it's as part of the IP policy, as I've said, you will have to have a proper stream structure for the technology transfer office. And you have to have an IP cell. An IP cell and TTO usually are different in a lot of organizations in academic entities. IP cell is mainly responsible for development of intellectual property, and TTO is usually responsible for technology transfer, which means that they engage with various universities, try and license the patents, license the IP, sell the IP, basically do industry interactions and commercialization, monetization matters. So the IP cell will be responsible for example, reviewing of invention disclosures, finalizing which invention disclosures are to be converted into patents, define timelines for filing of patents, budget for the whole patent portfolio program that has been defined out, and all other associated activities till the grant of the patent. Post the grant, the matter is put into the portfolio of the TTO, or even before it. Even during prosecution, we can always sell or license the patents, and therefore the TTO can not only wait till the grant of the patent, but can pick up applications even during their pendency. And therefore, it's extremely important to have a proper team structure. Training is very critical, as the fourth point that I've mentioned. It's extremely important to have continuous trainings, and these trainings have to be not about what IPR is all about. That everybody is expected to know by now. But the main intent of the training is essentially to imparcate specific knowledges on, for example, how to draft a patent application, how to search for a patent application, how to prepare responses, how to review a patent application, how to draft the claims, for example. All of these are specific sessions that need to be done for senior faculty members, so that when they are engaging patent attorneys, they know the quality of work being done by the attorneys. They know what the costing budget should be, how much time is being taken, is the work being done efficiently, is the prosecution being handled efficiently, are the patents strong enough, are the claims broad enough, are the claims enforceable or not. So the trainings have to go beyond the 101 on what IPRs are, what are patents, how are they registered. All of that has been done or should have been done by now. So I'm talking about tier 3 or far more detailed specific trainings on specific issues for specific faculties, so that there is very clear knowledge transfer that happens and their quality of portfolios significantly increase. I mean, we do this for a variety of IITs, from Roorkee to Guwahati to Hyderabad to Delhi, for example, many other institutes, and it's important to have the knowledge enhancement being done regularly. So once we have done that, then there are many other recommendations that we have as well on how the portfolios can be further strengthened. First, for example, for few of the academic entities that we work with, they have a very clear policy that they put the liability or the responsibility of commercialization of the patents on the professor in charge. So they will hold the person or the inventor responsible, that his responsibility is not only to invent and file for a patent and then go back, but his responsibility is equally also to ensure that there is some commercialization or monetization efforts that are made. And in the same lines, for example, we did a lot of work with Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, where there was a mechanism that was brought in where a provisional application would be filed first. Always. So even if the research is at the end and the research is absolutely positive and comprehensively conducted, even then the provisional applications would be filed. And once the provisionals are filed, the complete will be filed only if there is some commercialization potential that has been demonstrated by the inventors or the professors back to the IP cell, which means that after the provisional, the IP cell expects the professors or the faculties to make a small presentation to license or sell the patent and go to the relevant industries and write to the head of licensing, head of business development, the directors, or the relevant people at the R&D in those industries to understand if they'll be interested in licensing or buying the IP. And if they're able to show some interest, or if they're able to, if they, for example, approached 15 companies or 15 entities in India and outside, and if they're able to demonstrate 3 provisional interests or partial potential interests being demonstrated by 3 of the entities in say 12 months of time, then only will the complete application be filed for, otherwise the provisional will be lapsed. So the IP cell was very clear that the responsibility of licensing and monetization also lies with the faculty, because they are the ones who understand the invention the best. So they should be able to identify the companies that are most relevant for that particular invention, and it's their responsibility therefore to try and gauge whether there will be any interest in the technology. I have mentioned the example of TIFR, that they have a core marketing professional, for example, to market the technologies within 2 years, else the application is abandoned again. So even in this case, for example, this is not a standard protocol. I mean, I'm just giving an example of one or more instances that happened where we were dealing. And it was, for example, discussed and envisaged that once you file for a patent application, there's some background noise coming. If the person could be, Hina, if you could mute, please.
Yeah, yes.
So, so there was a process where the marketing professional was expected to do a tremendous amount of marketing for all the patent applications, and if no interest came in, say, for example, 2 years of the filing, then the process of patenting was completely discarded, unless there is obviously a hope that there will be an interest and the technology was very promising. But this gives a lot of, this puts pressure not only on the marketing professional or the person in the TTO, Technology Transfer Office, but also an onus on the professor and the inventor, that they will not, their responsibility is not only to file, but also to try and reach out to the industry, which does not really take a lot of time, because we do a lot of licensing at our end as well. So it's not that it takes days to license a technology. You could always identify in 1 hour 15 relevant companies and their names and email IDs of the directors and write an email. And if not everybody, but at least 10% of them would revert back. And that would be a very good feedback for you of whether they are interested, why they are not interested if they are not, for example. And therefore, please focus on monetization, not from the grant of the patent, but from the very filing itself. Now, we also counsel North Carolina State University, National University of Singapore, many other entities, particularly outside India, which have a very clear incentivization process, where they say that, say, 20% of the royalty or 20% of the license fee will go to the inventors. And even post the filing of the patent application itself, they get a certain amount, for example, $500 say, or $10,000, depending again on which entity, which academic institution, and what their policy frameworks are. In a lot of countries, obviously, there are guidelines where all the inventors have to be incentivized through monetary gains on the inventions that they're filing patent applications for. And therefore, incentivization becomes critical. And this is not the case only at the time of licensing or monetization, but also at the time of filing, so that there is more encouragement and motivation at the inventors end to file more patents, but which are meaningful in nature. So it's important, and that is where the responsibility of the IP cell lies, that they have to very critically examine each and every invention disclosure to check whether they'll be interested in license or in even filing a patent application. Because if the threshold is low, then a lot of inventions which are not of good quality would also pass the filter and get filed and eventually not get granted. And therefore, the technical team that sits at the IP cell to evaluate the disclosures have to keep the threshold and standard very high, so that even if the number of applications are lower, the quality is very high. And that's the ratio that a lot of these foreign US universities like Howard, North Carolina, Duke University, University of Southern California, we represent and file their applications in India. And they have very clear programs. They keep a metric on what percentage of the filed applications are being monetized. So if that percentage, for example, is lesser than 10%, then the threshold even increases, so that their filings come down and monetization happens more on quality applications. So there is some threshold that you have to maintain. It cannot be that you have 200 applications being filed in a year and not even 2 getting commercialized. What's the point of developing a portfolio of that nature? All right. So the point after that I wanted to talk about, these are various steps, and we do a lot of commercialization efforts at our end. We work with a lot of IITs and other technology oriented academic institutes where we pick up their technology. I can even share, if desired, a licensing presentation, how we reach out to companies, how we gauge their interest, how we prepare the term sheet of a particular engagement, how we do the valuation of a technology, and then eventually prepare the licensing agreement. All of that can be shared if required later on as well. 1 second. So the next step that I wanted to highlight was an example of Chitkara, for example, where a lot of entities and academic universities file patent applications in their name. But what also happens later on is that when they're filing in the name of the entity or the university, they're essentially paying an official fees of 8,000 rupees per application. That's the government fees of filing an application in the name of the university or in the name of the college, for example. Whereas there are certain techniques by means of which you can reduce your costs, your government fees and even the attorney fees significantly. You can, for example, incorporate a startup. So if there is a university by the name of, for example, ABC College of Engineering, then there could always be another startup that can be incorporated as an LLP or in the name of a private limited entity, which could be ABC College of Research LLC, for example, whatever, ABC Research LLC, for example. And once you have that, you can register yourself at the DIPP as a startup. And what happens there, by virtue of registering that entity and parking all your intellectual property and patents in the name of that startup entity, which is fully owned by fully owned or associated with the university or college in totality, what happens is that your official fees or your government fees for filing applications comes down from 8,000 rupees to 1,600. So it comes down significantly by 1/5, and you don't have to pay any attorney fees as well. So the attorney fees of 10,000 rupees is paid to us by the patent office. And therefore, when you were paying 25, 30, 20,000 to 30,000 rupees, whatever that amount was, as the attorney fees for filing an application, plus 8,000 rupees as the government fees. So 28,000 rupees all of a sudden becomes only 1,600 rupees. That's a massive jump. And you can really file maybe 20 applications in the same cost when you were able to file one application in. But the only caveat being that the intellectual property would not be held by the university, but it will be held by the startup, which is incorporated for this purpose, and it is legally affiliated to the college in totality. So you could also think on those innovative lines on how the cost structure can be brought down by incorporating startups or maybe becoming a part of different schemes of TIFAC or FICCI. We also, for example, are on the panel of FICCI and TIFAC, and a lot of cases that we get from TIFAC are from research institutes. So for example, the few cases come from Delhi Technical University or from Punjab Engineering College, and they send their invention disclosures to TIFAC, and TIFAC then engages us. And by virtue of that relationship, TIFAC pays us, and that the faculty in those colleges don't really have to pay us anything at all. And the cost is borne by TIFAC in totality. So that also helps significantly reduce your costs of overall portfolio development. All of these also have respective disadvantages, but you will have to weigh of whether the advantages outweigh the disadvantages in your particular case. Now, post this, I also wanted to share the step that the IP cell should obviously have an IP manager, which has to be a person who understands law as well as the technology part of it. And most of the big universities have it. They have somebody who, because if say somebody who does not understand the law would not be able to understand the timelines, the relevant sections, how to file, where to file, when to file, what is the patent of addition, what is the divisional application. So, I mean, there has to be some strategy with which the portfolio has to be developed. And they also, at the end of the day, have to counsel the professors and the faculties on which applications to file and how, what are the chances of obtaining a patent. So unless there is a patent professional who is being trained in patent law, understands the law as well as the technology, he would not be able to manage the portfolio efficiently. And therefore, it's very important to have somebody who understands both sides of the world. There has to be in the IP cell somebody who is very strong on research and development in different technology areas. And they are the ones who screen the invention disclosures that they receive from the faculty and then engage the patent attorneys to draft patent applications. And therefore, even the large institutes have multiple patent attorneys. So IISc, for example, may have about 5 to 6 different patent law firms that they work with, and they allocate work to each of them depending specifically on which attorney firm is known for what kind of work. So we may do a lot of biotechnology or microbiology work, but we may not be doing a lot of semiconductor work hypothetically. And therefore, it's important to pick and choose and know the strengths of each of the patent attorneys on board and allocate matters to them, which is also the responsibility of the IP manager. So it's very critical to have somebody who manages and not really somebody who's coming only from a technology background, because he would not understand the ball game of the legal side of it and also how to interact efficiently with the patent attorneys. I mentioned about the next point in the previous slide as well. I always am of a firm belief that there are 2 types of patents. There is a good patent and then there are just patents. You can always get a patent granted. You can always get a patent granted by writing a very narrow independent claim, because the examiner would not be able to identify all the elements of the patent claim and therefore will say, okay, your invention is novel. And you may also argue with him on the second aspect of patentability, which is for inventive step. But what happens is that unless the claims are appropriately worded and they are broad enough, what's the point of having a patent at all? Because even if you get a patent granted with, say, 10 elements that form part of the first independent claim, and then you tomorrow go to a company to try and license it or sell it, they will look at the independent claim and in 1 minute, they will say that this invention is not worthy of being licensed at all, because I can easily design around it. I can easily bypass it. So there is absolutely, to my benefit, rather than filing 100 applications a year, it is much better to file 20. But it is extremely important to make sure that the patents have been drafted appropriately, the claims are broad, and tomorrow when the patents get granted, at least you are having a higher chance of being able to sell or license the patents versus having a big inventory of granted patents which are so narrow. When I say narrow, I mean that there are, for example, in the first independent claim, there are elements A, B, C, D, E, F. Now, if you have 6 elements from A to F in your independent claim, and a company tomorrow launches a product that potentially may infringe on your patent, that product would infringe on the patent only if it has all the 6 elements. So if that company tomorrow launches a product which has A, B, C, D, E, but does not use F, then there is a high chance that he may never infringe on your patent at all. And therefore, it would have been better to get a patent granted for ABC rather than A, B, C, D, E, F. Because if that company launches a product with A, B, C, D, E, because he's using ABC, he's infringing on your patent. I don't want to go into that direction of drafting applications and claims, but I only wanted to mention and emphasize that a lot of academic entities, names of which I don't want to release or sort of talk about or give, focused only on numbers. And that I think is not the right thing to do at all. It's much better to have 1/4 the portfolio, but have a good, strong portfolio which is strong enough and worthy of being licensed tomorrow at a later point in time. Then the next point that I wanted to talk about was that it's important to train the inventor and the faculty to absorb the prior art that exists. So we also have a lot of difficulty sometimes because the inventors, which are professors with 20 years of experience, 25 years of experience, they believe that they know the world, they know all the prior art that exists, that they are the masters in their domain name, in their domain, subject matter domain, and that whatever inventions that they do will always be patentable. I would sincerely and humbly submit that it is never the case. It is extremely important for the inventors and faculty to understand that what they are aware of is based on their knowledge of what they have read. And what they have read can never be 100% of what is existing. So it is important to control and train the faculty on their ego so that tomorrow when a prior art comes, they don't become defensive and say that, okay, no, because I have done it, there is nothing that exists. This prior art is very different. You will have to explain how it is different. Even if it is different, is it obvious? Or is it something that is sort of a small improvement that you've done, which would be considered to be non-obvious to the examiner? Because if it would not be non-obvious, then you will never get the patent. The examiner will be very comfortable in refusing the patent at all. So it's a challenge for the IP manager and also for the patent attorneys to train the faculty and the professors to try and explain that there is a whole new world that exists even beyond what they're aware of. And there is a high likelihood that there may be prior arts which are far more relevant to the invention that they have done than the knowledge that they already have. And it's very critical that they take it in the right spirit. Because if they take it on their ego and if they say that, no, I have done it, there is nothing better than I can do, and then you don't understand the invention and therefore your prior arts are useless, then it is not helping anybody at all. Trust me, if a patent attorney is coming and telling you that a prior art exists and it will be difficult to obtain a patent, he is the one who is losing business. Because for him to obtain business, he would have obviously been very happy to tell you that nothing exists, let's draft a patent application on which he can bill you. But if he's coming to you and telling you that prior art exists, it is the job and it is the responsibility of the faculty to listen to it, because it is painful, even more painful and unprofitable for the patent attorney to find prior arts, because then there is a chance that the patent application may never get drafted at all. So my humble request to please understand that the patent attorneys and the IP managers are working with the faculty to try and improve the chances of obtaining a patent that is broad and significant and enforceable enough and worthy of being commercialized tomorrow. So please do keep your ego aside, keep your issues aside when reviewing prior art, and look at it as if you are reviewing your own invention, and be as critical about it as possible, because only then we will together be able to draft and obtain a good patent. I have already mentioned this point, file lesser but stronger patents. I think it's extremely important. Lesser patents and number of patents being granted, the higher number of patents granted may not always result in stronger patents. It's far more important to have a higher budget, but for a lesser number of patents, because that will give you more quality of work and will give you patents worthy of monetization at a later date. A lot of inventors don't also understand the differences between inventors and applicants, and therefore I wanted to take a minute to explain that. A lot of inventors feel that because they have done the invention, they own the invention. That is not the case. IP policies that different organizations and entities have, always explain the kind of ownership that would happen. And certain institutes, like for example, Indian Institute of Science, very clearly states that even if the inventors want to fund their own invention, do their own research, do not utilize the funds provided by IISc or anything, come what may, the ownership of the IP will be with IISc Bangalore and nobody else. It's as simple and straightforward as that. And therefore, when I say ownership, I mean the applicants. It's always and always the applicants that own the invention. Inventors are the ones who invent that particular invention. And therefore, inventors will be listed as the list of inventors. The same inventors may also be applicants, but it may not necessarily be true. Now, for example, if inventor A, B, and C, which are professors A, B, and C, got together to do the invention and they file for a patent, the patent could be filed either in the name of the institute, say XYZ, where the XYZ will be the applicant and the inventors will be ABC. There could also be a case where if the applicant XYZ agrees, the inventors also become applicants, in which case there will be 4 applicants, which is XYZ, comma, A, comma, B, comma, C, and there will be 3 inventors, A, B, and C. The entity can never be an inventor. That's also a question that we receive, but obviously can never be. Inventors are always natural persons, individuals, and applicants are always either companies or natural persons, or can be a commission depending on what your IP policy or IP cell allows you to do. So anytime when you have a question on how much revenue sharing will happen, how much benefit sharing will happen, can I be the applicant? You will have to go back to the IP cell and take a permission from them of whether do they allow you to become an applicant, or would the applicant always be the entity. They may also have an IP policy which says that if you are doing your own research using your own funds, then you can be the inventor, you can be the applicant. But if you're using the funds of the applicant, which is of the entity, then you will always have to make the applicant as the institute, and the inventor will always be. So that depends, that varies from institute to institute, from college to college, and from university to university. I will just finish up my presentation in the next 15 minutes or 10 minutes, and then I'm happy to take whatever questions that there are, and maybe explain on any aspects that you think I have not explained. Now, direct filing by inventors through versus academia institute. I have mentioned this as well. If the IP policy allows, if there is no IP policy, you will have to go to the registrar and take a written permission if you wish to file the patent application in your name as an individual applicant. But if you are not sure, the registrar is the first point of contact if there is no IP cell. Otherwise, you have to go to the IP cell, read the IP policy, and determine whether you can, as an inventor, file an application directly or not. If there is a way that you can file it, in which case you become the inventor, inventor A becomes the inventor, and also he becomes the applicant. It is also possible that if the research is being funded by the professor and he has 2 research interns, then the research interns are mentioned as the inventors, but the applicant is only the professor in charge, which means that there will be 3 inventors, the 2 research interns, A, B, and then C, the professor, and the applicant will be the professor C. But if the IP policy, as I said, says that no, only the academic entity has to be the applicant, then you will have to make XYZ as the applicant, and the other 3 will always be remaining as an inventor. And therefore, it's very important that in the IP cell, apart from benefit sharing, apart from the IP cell structure, apart from monetization, clarification issues on that front, you have clarity on ownership. Who owns the invention? Ownership of a patent is equal to who the applicants are. It's as simple as that. If there are 4 applicants, they own the invention 25% each, unless they have an agreement which says that no, A owns 30%, B owns 10%, and so on and so forth. I've just mentioned the figure, which is from Science Direct Link, which I've mentioned here, which basically says that here is the university, there are the researcher, there is a research output, then there is a technology transfer office, which can be integrated with the IP cell. It could be separate depending on the institute. Then there are patents, there are various other activities associated with it, and then there is industry on the other side. So the university professors and researchers will do the research output, give that for screening to the IP cell or to the TTO, which will generate or help generate the patents, which will then give licenses or sell the IP to industries, or will have spin-off. Like IIT Madras is an excellent example of spin-off. They have numerous startups which have come out from IIT Madras and have licensed the patents. Most of the directors, most of the management of those and the spin-offs are the professors themselves. And therefore, IIT Madras has a very, very good model. IIT Bombay also is a very good model there. And you would see at least 30, 35 startups being there, maybe more. I'm not very sure of the exact numbers, but they're all spin-offs where the management are the professors and the faculties, and they've taken a license from IIT Bombay to commercialize the invention. And it could be an exclusive license, it could be a non-exclusive, it could be an exclusive for a defined subject matter, it could be exclusive for a territory, it could be exclusive for 2 years. There are many, many, many ways of structuring a licensing agreement, and that needs to be carefully thought out because these agreements are long-term in nature. All right. This is mainly a representation. This is an old presentation on certain top academic institutions that filed patent applications. This is 2016-17 report that came up from the IP India website. You can download it as well. So these are, so IITs collectively had filed about 400 applications, followed by Amity, IISc Bangalore, Veltech, GH Raisoni. I think this is in Maharashtra. We do some work with them as well. And then there are Chandigarh group of colleges. There's Chitkara University that we represent as well. There are many NITs which are collective. But this is not an actual representation as of today. I think there are many, many other academic institutions that file far higher number of patents. I just wanted to take the screenshot from a credible source. But otherwise, I think SRM University, Anna University, Manipal University, I think Lovely Professional University, a lot of them are filing tremendous number of patents, and therefore their volumes are far higher in that sense. I think on the last slide, I wanted to talk about how the certain other points that I wanted to emphasize upon. We've also seen certain foreign institutes, for example, in certain universities in Taipei, in Taiwan, and also ETRI, which is the ETRI, Electronic and Telecommunication Research Institute in Korea. Many others also put forth certain technologies which are free for license. That's a way that they become more visible. So instead of doing it for the whole portfolio, a small portfolio which may be in the healthcare space, for example, or maybe in the telecom space, for example, they publish those patents in a separate bucket and mark them as open for license. Any company, like NRDC had done it, I think, a while back, or certain other Indian institutes, a certain Indian academy had also done it in the past, that they have a certain bucket of 15, 20, 100 patent applications, and they say that these are all open, non-exclusive, royalty-free license being given to commercialize and to any company in India or outside. And this is for societal support, and there is absolutely no royalty to be paid. I think if a part of your portfolio can be categorized as such royalty-free licenses, then I think it would make the whole portfolio and your licensing efforts even more visible and positively looked upon from. Because commercialization is a very difficult thing to achieve in India. It's extremely tough to get interest from the academy to buy patents or to license patents, because they are always of the orientation that they would rather design around or circumvent the patent so as to not pay any royalty or license fee, even if they like the technology. And as a result of which, I think it's important that the industry gains confidence. They gain access to the kind of patents and the kind of technology that is being developed by various institutes. So I think even if 5% of your portfolio can be put forth separately to say that these patents are open for commercialization, like Tesla had done a few years back, I think that gives a lot of visibility and becomes again a differentiating element. And even if you have 5 or 6 license agreements positioned or executed through this model, then I think you have a good success story to tell tomorrow, to the media at large and to other students at large, to motivate them to file more. it's also important to have controlled annuities to be paid for patents not being commercialized. It should not happen that the patents have been granted and they're not being commercialized. So even after 4 years or 5 years, we continue to pay royalty or we continue to pay annuity fees to maintain the patents. There has to be in the IP cell a very clear guideline, as I've indicated in the second slide. You should not allow a complete application to be filed till the time the inventors and the faculty demonstrate that there is commercial relevance to the patents first. Second, if the patents are not commercialized or there is no potential commercialization feedback that you're getting from industries to attract them, or they're not giving you positive feedback, they're saying this is not of relevance, or the technology is not getting the kind of traction that it was envisaged to, then maybe after 2 years of efforts, you discard the patent in totality. And even the third, as I've said, even if the patent gets granted, you can for sure have controlled annuities. They don't need to be paid every year. There has to be a benchmark which is set. There has to be a certain amount which is set, that you have to be able to generate royalty of a certain amount, only after which your patents would be maintained, and for example, your annuities will be maintained only from the revenue that comes out from the license. Post 5 years, you could always have those conditions in the IP cell, which puts pressure on the patentees. When I say by patentees, I meant the inventors, so that they go ahead and improve their relationships with the industry and try to commercialize whatever they have developed. Research-oriented, industry-oriented research, I think this is extremely critical. A lot of times we do research which may or may not be interesting to the industry at large. So I think every professor, through the various platforms on social media, like for example, LinkedIn or many other professional networks, you can always reach out to the directors of companies in your domain. So if you're focusing on nanotechnology in a particular problem that you're trying to solve, I'm sure you will be able to identify companies that are trying to solve the same problem. Connect with the directors and the research R&D heads of those companies, understand the kind of problems that they're solving, and if you are able to solve it, file for a provisional application and then go back to them and tell them that we have discussed it, we have worked on it, and we have been able to file a patent. Would you be interested? The likelihood of successful commercialization is much higher when the research is industry oriented, because it is being led by the industry. Even if the industry is not sponsoring it, even if they're not monitoring, paying you for the efforts that you are making or contributing to it from a monetary standpoint, if your research is based on feedback that you get from the industry, it automatically becomes relevant and has much higher chances of successful commercialization by the TTO tomorrow when the patent application gets granted. And as I've again earlier said, we do not have to wait till the patent gets granted. Sooner the application is filed, you can go out to the industry at large, seek their feedback. In fact, if you filed a provisional application and they say technology looks good, but you can sort of maybe improve this aspect of it, then within the 12 months that you get, you can actually even improve and use those 12 months to significantly enhance the quality of the invention and file a complete application with those many details in that sense. I have a few other links that I wanted to share across. This is all there in the presentation on the slides as well. There are many other slides that you can, links that you can refer down to. This is the intellectual property policy of the Harvard University. This is the full IP policy, which is on the Office of Technology Development. For example, they have an IP cell. Obviously, their TTO is called as the Office of Technology Development, and they are very extensive about each and every patent application that they file and how much does that contribute eventually from a monetization standpoint. Every professor, everybody is, the IP, and we can go through the IP policy if someone wishes, but it's a very extensive policy, and they look at IP extremely sensitively, because a big percentage of their revenue comes from, so this OTD, for example, is like a private company. So they're run through the royalties that they earn. They don't take money from the university at large. So their mandate is to run the whole Office of Technology Development and the salaries of all the staff of the OTD from the royalties and the revenue that comes out from licensing of that intellectual property. That is how they're all structured to do. And that is what makes most of them, fundamentally very, very strong in terms of licensing out their IP. This is another link which would also give you an idea of what is the role of IP in universities and public research institutions. Why do institutes and PRIs need an IP policy? I think this is a link that I've shared as well. I've already talked about ownership. When do students own IP? When do the visiting researchers own IP, and so on and so forth, and how WIPO can assist and stuff like that. I just wanted to share this along with this another link that is also there. I've shared this as well. This also talks about certain aspects of sort of not opening up right now. Yeah, this is in the 24th page. So this talks about, again, going to the first page, talks about what type of IPs there are, institutional IPs, and largely the same points that I've talked about. IP management units are the IP cells here. This is the technology transfer office. These are the issues that are to be covered in an IP policy. Should have focused on ownership of IP, should have benefit sharing, the right of the government, public funded research, spin-offs, how would they be treated, how would the license agreements be taken care of. I think I've talked about all of these aspects. Invention disclosure form, how that need to be filled up. This is about the ownership. And they've talked about certain other aspects of in what cases will the creator own the IP, and in what cases will the other party own the IP in that sense. So I think I am largely done with what I wanted to share, but the good half an hour that we have, wanted to understand what questions and what specific use cases everybody has. So maybe we can raise hands or in a defined protocol if we could have one by one.
Sir, this is Dr. Niranjan. Sir,
Yes.
am I audible, sir,
Yes, yes.
for you, sir?
Yes, yes.
Sir, one simple doubt I have. Suppose if I file a name under me as applicant, can I use the digital signature of the registrar for university, or should I use my own digital signature while filing?
If the applicant is Niranjan Hiremath, then the digital signature has to be of the applicant. It cannot be of the registrar of the university, because registrar will be the signatory on behalf of the university. So if you use his digital signature, it means that the university is the applicant, which in your case is not the case.
Okay, that means we have to mention the university name as the applicant.
Absolutely, absolutely, sir.
Okay, then can I add my name also, sir, in the list of applicants along with university name?
You could, but again, as I said earlier also, that would purely depend on the IP policy, and you will have prior permission that you will have to take from the registrar. So you will have to tell the registrar that I am the inventor and I would also want to be the applicant, share 50% of the rights of the invention, and therefore 50% would be held by the university, 50% by me. And is that okay as regards the IP policy of the academic institution is concerned?
Then we can add his name also. I mean, the register, the university name as well as my name in the applicant.
You get the approval, yes, you can, sir.
Yes, sir. So almost, sir. Suppose, so if I
I'll come to 1 minute, okay. Dr. Niranjan. I'll come to everybody one by one who's raising his hand. So I'll just come back to you. Just 1 second.
It's okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Sir, I've got one question.
Yes, sir.
Sir, when will be the patent examination comes into picture, sir?
Patent examination. So once you file a patent application, the application by default gets published after 18 months. And then you have to apply for the examination request. So you have to do it within 4 years. Once you file the request for examination, in about 1 to 2 years, depending on the controller or the examiner who is allocated to you, the examination of the application will be done, and he will raise or issue the examination report, which is called the first examination report, to which you will get 6 months to reply back.
Sir, is it mandatory to have examination for all the patents?
There is no other alternative, sir. Every application has to be. Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much.
Dr. Ranjit, sir.
Hello.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Dr. Kavita, I'll just come to you in a minute, ma'am.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. See, you said that there are 2 types of patents. There are good patents, and then there are just patents, right? So for somebody like me who's evaluating, for example, applications for faculty positions and so on, is there a quick way of telling which is a good patent and which is just a patent? You know,
so it's a very good. It's a very good question. Unfortunately, I think I can really help you here. The best way to evaluate a patent in less than 30 seconds is to go to the claims and read the first independent claim. If the first independent claim is very narrow, which means that it is a very long claim. By narrow, I mean the number of elements in the claim are too many. If the longer the claim, the poorer the patent.
Okay.
It's as simple as that. I'm not making a judgment here. I'm just telling you, if you have to evaluate it in 30 seconds, the best way to do it is to go, because if your first independent claim talks about elements A, B, C, D, E, F, then for somebody to infringe on that patent, he will have to use all the elements. So the lesser the number of elements in your first independent claim, the broader the patent, the stronger the patent.
Okay. But I still have to go through the claims. And is there a quicker way? For example, somebody has 10 patents. Somebody writes to me, says that he has.
It will take you 30 seconds. Claim. You just have to go to the claims and look at the length of the claim. That's it. Just look at the length. The law. If it's more than 5 lines, for example, it will become tougher for that guy to enforce it. It's as simple as that. But if you read the abstract or the summary or the detailed invention or the detailed description, you will never be able to make out whether it's a good or a bad or a how much of the invention is value adding. Claims, independent claim, length. That's all what you have to look at, sir.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Dr. Kavita, please, ma'am.
Yeah. Sir, I have a doubt that I filed one patent and I received the first examination report of that one. And then the deadline of the submission is on the month of June. Okay, due to this coronavirus scenario, can I submit the examination report now?
Ma'am,
response to that report?
Yeah, ma'am, the response to the report has to be submitted within 6 months. So if it is due in December, am I correct to assume that it was dated December of 2019?
No, yes, but the deadline to submit the response is in the month of June.
Which means that the examination report is dated December of 2019, which is why you have 6 months to do it. Ma'am, you can't get an extension because all the extensions have been given only till 17th of May right now. So if your deadline is in June, you will not get any you will not get an automatic extension because of COVID, but you can always, for sure, you can apply for an extension specifically by paying a fee and get another 3 months extension to file the reply. That you can always do, but by default, because of COVID, you will not get a default extension.
Okay, okay.
But
so we have to submit it before June, no?
Yeah, but as I said, you can apply for an extension. There is a fee for 200, 300, 400 rupees per month, and you can apply for it for 3 months, and you will then get 3 months to reply. You get 3 months more to reply to it.
Okay. Is there any electronic mode to submit the response, sir?
You cannot automatically do it, but the attorney that you might have used, he will do it, or otherwise you will have to create your account and use your digital signature to do it, because all the responses that we develop, we file are all online, but we are patent attorneys and therefore we have our own online system. But a lot of other individual inventors also have their digital signature and they create an account to file patents and also responses.
Okay.
But you cannot email it. You cannot email it or, for example, upload it without the digital signature.
Okay, sir. I will have another doubt from your presentation that you said that in the applicant's name, along with the inventors, you said that the college name can also be included. So if we done so, is that under the corporate submission or as the individual submission, sir?
And the question is not very clear, but first of all, the college or the entity cannot be listed as an inventor. I've already mentioned that inventors have to be natural people. If they become, if any one of the applicants is an entity, for example, if it's Chitkara University hypothetically, then they all automatically have to pay 8,000 rupees, which is the government fees for filing a patent application in the name of a legal entity.
Oh, okay. Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Suresha? Dr. Suresha, can you ask? All right. So while I am, there are a few questions on Zoom chat as well. Dr. Balakrishnan had asked me about, for example, pharmaceutical patents. And in that context, I would submit that, we at Khurana & Khurana are a team of 200 people. So I come from a computer science background, but then there are almost about 40 patent attorneys that we have in the space of pharmaceuticals. So they work with not only institutes and academia, but also with entities like Glenmark and Alembic, Torrent and Unichem and many other pharmaceutical clients in that sense. So, there are different professionals that focus on different aspects of technology. Mukesh Gupta, sir?
Yes, sir. Sir, I have 2 questions actually. One is just like we are filing the patent with the name of the inventor, right? And applicant is also the inventor, right? And inventor has some affiliation of the university. So what is the advantage of that university that is not applicant but is the affiliation only for the inventor?
Sir, if there is only an affiliation because the inventor who is the applicant is working with that university, then then the university does not have any contribution at all. It doesn't make any difference at all. He may or may not have an affiliation, but as regards the legal rights are concerned, the legal rights will vest with the applicant who's the individual inventor. That's it. Nobody else will get the rights at all. So his relationship or no relationship with the university will have no bearing on the patent application or the rights that arise out of it.
Okay. While actually all the fee related to the Attorney General or the government fee is bear by the university also.
If the government fees is borne by the university and they are still okay not to be listed as an applicant, you will be very lucky. Because in most cases, the universities are very clear that if they are funding you for the patent process, then they would have to be listed as an applicant. There's no doubt about it. But if they are still not following that practice at their convenience, then that's their convenience. Then they will have no rights. They will just put the money, and if they don't have any agreement with the applicant who's the inventor, then the inventor will continue to own the whole invention and can do whatever he wishes to. But it's not a regular use case.
Okay. So second question is that once you have filed the completed patent, then what will the minimum duration to publish it?
So you can file a request for early publication for which you have to pay 12,500 rupees in the name of the company or the institute if you have filed, and 2,500 in the name of individual if you have filed. That 2,500 will allow you to get your application published within 1 month of the date of request or early publication.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Kavita, you had a question? Niranjan, you had a question, Dr. Hiramath?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, if the university becomes the applicant, the fees will be different, sir. If the university or any the college.
Sir, if a legal entity becomes an applicant, then they have to pay fees for a legal entity, which is 8,000 for the filing, 20,000 rupees for the examination, 12,500 for early publication. If the applicant is an individual, all the costs become 1/5.
Okay. No, sir. If the university and somebody files on behalf of the university or the college, the fees, I think, since because you said now the entity becomes applicant, then fees will be more or compared to individual.
Obviously, as I said, the fees will be more. The attorney fees does not change, but then the legal, the official and the government fees increases, as I said, sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Dr. Sunita, Dr. Chippa?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Chippa, go ahead.
Yes. That is the question. How we can extract the claims and find out the prior arts for.
So then there is a separate session that you will have to have for that, of how do you do patentability and validity searches. So there is a whole technique for doing patent searches across multiple databases. You have to form keywords, you have to have classifications, you have to combine the keywords with the classifications to find out the relevant set of results, then read those results to analyze of how they are mapping to the patent in context. So there is a whole process and variety of techniques that we as patent professionals are trained to as regards the searching capabilities are concerned. Sir. Dr. Sunita?
Yeah, actually you told that a college can start a startup and we can file the patents in the name of that startup. So I had a few questions related to that. So I'll ask all the questions together so that we can collectively answer. First thing, can we have many patents under one startup? Second, how, if you can tell me more about how the money management can be done in this case. And the third question is, see, being a educational institute, we also need to take care of NAC or various ranking like NIRF and so on. So if the patent is being filed under different name, so do the college gets even credit for that? Thank you, sir.
Ma'am, to answer the question, number of patents, there is no limit. You can file as many patents in the name of the startup as you wish.
Okay.
Second question of the
money management.
Money management, yeah. So that's a tricky part. You will have to sort of, every university will, there is no thumb rule for it. But what happens is that the startup is funded by the university, and the money that is to be paid out, which is essentially the government fees, and maybe if you are getting the patent search done, maybe that search fee to the attorney, that amount can be paid through the funding money that the startup has received.
Okay.
Any commercialization that might happen or licensing that might happen on that portfolio will also be proceeds that will be earned by the startup itself, because that startup is the one that is owning or has the IP has been parked in the name of the startup. So the money management essentially could also be an arrangement which could be a tripartite agreement between the attorney, university and the startup, stating that the money for the patents being filed by the startup is to be paid by the university, because the startup is a legally associated entity to the university. So you'll have to associate it, and which is the answer to the next question also, that when you are able to establish the legal association, that it's a fully owned subsidiary, or if it's a fully owned, it's a trust, for example, it's not even an entity, it's a trust, for example, that you've created, and that trust becomes the startup, whatever it may be. But essentially, you will have to legally associate the college/institute with the startup, even while submitting your numbers at the regulatory authorities which you talked about. And if they have a question of how that happened, so they might obviously have a question there, that it's not in the name of the university and therefore we can't give you the points that you will otherwise would have got. But if you're able to establish a legal association and say that that is only being used as a parking authority, it's a parking entity and they're legally associated. It's not that it's a completely distinct university and or a distinct startup. So like we've done for Chitkara, we don't go into too much of detail because it's handled by everybody. But what we know is that there's a Chitkara Innovation Foundation and there's Chitkara University. There's a legal association, and Chitkara Innovation Foundation perhaps is filing all the patents in their own name, and that's all the IP is held, and the billing is done to the university or to the startup itself, depending on the arrangement that they have made or configured for that matter. But how they report it to the regulatory of the Ministry of Education or whichever is the one, that I think that is how they maintain it, that the university does not have the IP, but the IP has been deliberately parked in the startup. And the startup is a legal associated entity, and therefore they should get the respective points for the development of the IP.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, it solved most of my queries, but still I have a small doubt, and actually I need to read more about it, because this idea of having a startup is a very good idea. But then see, there are entities like NIRF. They don't even ask us how many patents we are being filing or published or granted. They just check it through the IP India site. And so if they cannot find our college name or our institute name over there, will be a problem. So we need to read
and then
more about it.
Then you can seek a clarity, right, from NIRF, whatever that institute is. Then I think you should seek a clarity. That's the best way. Write a letter out to them But I think because a few institutes have already started doing it, they would have had the same concerns earlier. And if it was not working for them, then perhaps they wouldn't have been continuing to do it.
Yeah,
So
need to, as I said, need to research a little bit more about this.
Please,
but
please.
That's a good idea. Thank you for suggesting.
No problem. Sure, thank you. Any other question that any colleague has here? A lot of people have asked for the presentation. It will surely be shared by Bhumika. If not today, tomorrow latest, or by Monday. So Neeraj Mandral has asking, what if the inventor leaves the university? If the patent application has already been filed and the inventor leaves the university, he will still always be an inventor. Inventor always remains an inventor. He will never become a non-inventor. So there is no question about him leaving the university impacting the patent per se. But he will have to sign the Form 1, which is the proof of right, so that the university gets the right on the patent while he is being listed as the inventor. So otherwise, there is no major impact of him leaving it. In case he or she plans to file the patent after leaving, that would depend again on the IP policy, but the IP policy is silent about it. And the patent application is filed post the leaving of the inventor from that university, but it pertains to the work that he was doing in the university, then it's a dicey thing, because then the university can come back tomorrow and file a suit against the inventor stating that he used the resources of the university and deliberately left the university to file the patent post the leaving. And therefore, I would not advise you to file a patent after leaving on the same subject matter on which you are working and using the resources of the university, because they might create a trouble tomorrow by filing a pre-grant opposition or filing a suit directly. Another question has been asked, can a patent be filed in India as well as in the US together? Yes, but you would not want to have two applications which are filed on the same day. For example, it's ideally all the applications should be linked to one priority application. So ideally, you should either file in India first, and then after 6 weeks, email that the session was attended by the respective colleagues, and that could be used, but not the certificate per se would not be sent out for this issue. Any other question that anybody has here? Any other concerns? Any other question at all? So I think very good. Was a pleasure to be able to discuss and interact with the. So there's one more question. What if I do not want to file a patent application in India at all? So if you don't want to do that, then you will have to take a foreign filing license under Section 39 of the Indian Patent Act. You can go to Google and write foreign filing license, and you can read about it. Once you obtain the foreign filing license, which takes about 3 weeks, then you can file it in the PCT or in the US directly without filing in India at all. I will wait for another 30 seconds if anybody has a follow-up question.
Sir, one small doubt, sir. Sir, if applicant name is a individual but digital signature is done by registrar, will it be okay, sir? I think, is there any conflict?
But Niranjan, I just answered that question about 10 minutes back. Same question. You may want to hear the recording once again when the recording comes in, but I did mention that if you're using the digital signature of a registrar, that would mean that the applicant is the entity or the university itself. So if you are an individual capacity, an applicant, then you will have to use your own digital signature.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yes, Hina ji.
Ji, sir. I have one query. At least 1 or 2 years earlier, I have received one mail from Delhi, but still I have not recognized the person name from the IP cells. They have asked me for my one publication I have published in the Springer journal regarding the cellular degrading fungi in my PhD work. So after my work was published, and they have asked me regarding the copyright filing for the same. So I just confused because work is already published. So how may I take a copyright? And they have asked me regarding the which type of control measure you have used, and you have to make some key points, and then we will help you for such type of filing. So that type of information I want to ask you regarding earlier published work. We may just refine this work, or in any modified form, we may again file for some process filing for the patent.
Ma'am, as I had mentioned earlier, copyright is standard. It's an implicit right. So once you have published a work, then it is automatically registered, and you own the copyright for that at all. So you don't have to go to the copyright office or get a registration done for the same explicitly at all. There is absolutely no requirement for that.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Nice presentation. Thank you.
Another question, can a patent be filed without any evidence, data, prototype? So no, you will have to substantiate the invention. Basically, the test is that you have to explain the invention in sufficient detail so that anybody reading that patent application is able to make the invention. So it's not about the data or the prototype per se, but the level of explanation and the detail of the description that you have to give should be detailed enough so that somebody reading that description is able to envisage and make the invention in totality. That's the test that you will have to apply, and you will have to give evidence and detail to that level. Another question is, what is entity? What are the merits and demerits of individual versus startup applications? Entity is any legal entity, which could be an LLP or a private limited company. It could be a partnership firm. Any entity which is an entity is any legal entity which has the rights to do one or more actions from a legislative intent standpoint. What are the merits and demerits of an individual versus an individual in startup applications? I think the cost is one aspect. Startup and individuals obviously have a lot of advantage because the fees is much lower, government fees. Startups don't have to pay any attorney fees. The fees is paid by the patent office of 10,000 rupees for drafting an application. So the startup gives you that advantage once it is recognized by the DIPP or the DPIIT, and you have to register your startup there. And that's about it. Nothing. I mean, otherwise, you can also apply for an expedited examination using the startup process. And once you have the expedited examination, you can get the patent granted. Get the patent granted much faster. What should the age of a startup? The question is not very clear. Startup could be any. There is a certain set of conditions which will help you understand what is the qualification of a startup. How does one entity qualify to be a startup? You can just go on Google and type out, or you can go to the DIPP website. You can just understand what the definition of a startup is from there, and then get an understanding. Any other question? Verbally, anybody wants to ask?
Yeah, maybe the last question. Do you have any idea on when will be the patent agent exam will be held now because of this COVID?
Somewhere around June and July, it may be an online exam that might take place as well. We are not sure what because we are doing a patent agent examination course for the last since the 1st of May. We are doing 40 people are there in that course, and they are going through that course. We are teaching them and how to prepare for it and stuff like that. But it may happen in June end, or I don't know, the July. There's some notifications that have come. So you might want to go to the IP India website, ma'am, and read there in terms of what the latest notification is about.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right. Then thank you very, very much. Everybody, was a pleasure interacting. Was a very interactive session. Thank you for asking the questions, and I look forward to stay in touch. My name is Tarun Khurana once again, and you can also take my email address as tarun@khurana and Khurana. My phone number is 9810617992. Feel free to call me up if there's any question. Otherwise, my colleagues Bhumika can also be reached out, and she can relay the information back to me. It was a pleasure. Thank you, and take care of yourself during these times. Thank you.
Thank you.